Both these bills relate to the way we elect the president, national popular vote, electoral college, and so on. And just for a little bit of history, some of you were here at the time, some of you were not. This body before my time, voted down what's called the National Popular Vote Compact, the idea being that the state of Rhode Island would join a compact of states that would award its electoral college votes to the candidate that won the national popular vote. It was voted down before my time. It was voted down again my first year here in 2009, and then it passed by a vote of 41 to 31 on June 13, 2013. I'm looking around the committee. There's a mixture of people here who voted for and against that bill. My bill 5520 seeks to revisit this issue and remove Rhode Island from this compact. And I just want to address this because I think this issue gets a lot of attention, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions. It sounds good to say we should elect the president by national popular vote. And this movement got its impetus in the Bush versus Gore 2000 election when Bush did not win the popular vote but did win the electoral college, which at that time I believe was only the second time in U.S. history that had happened. The first time had been in the 1800s. So a movement began to say we should elect the president by popular vote. And the compact that exists, that Rhode Island is now a part of, would mandate that even if the popular vote of Rhode Island went for one candidate, if it went nationwide for another candidate, the electoral votes would go to that candidate. So for this year, for example, even though Kamala Harris won Rhode Island fairly easily, we would have been casting our electoral votes for Donald Trump, which I don't think would have represented the will of the majority of the people of Rhode Island. So it can lead to strange things like that. But the bigger issue is this. If we elect by the national popular vote, and we have to stop looking at this from a partisan political perspective, because that was the origin of this original compact. It was. And at the time, there was a movement, mainly among Democrats, to believe that if the national popular vote controlled, it might give them an edge in presidential elections. But we can't look at this method from that perspective. We have to look at it from an historical perspective and a structural perspective. And I'm just going to tick off a few things, and I'm going to turn it over to the witness. First, in 2016, for example, when it happened for the third time in American history, when Donald Trump won the Electoral College but lost the popular vote by roughly 3 million votes, if you removed two counties in California, LA and Marin County, Donald Trump would have won the national popular vote. I say that because it means that essentially you've got pockets of the country that have an overwhelming number of people that may not represent the interest of Rhode Island. The Electoral College was created to protect states like ours. If we were California, I might support this as a matter of not principle, but just partisan politics or influence for the state of California. But if you were a small state, the Electoral College magnifies your ability to select the president. And people will criticize that and say, well, Rhode Island always votes Democrats and no one pays attention to us. Well, maybe right in this current moment, but Rhode Island hasn't always voted Democrat. In fact, there was a whole stretch of years, many, many years ago, when Rhode Island always voted Republican. Things do change. We should be electing our president, and we should be setting our rules based on what's good structurally from an overall perspective, not from what the current political moment is. I also want to point out that if we had a situation where the national popular vote was ever razor thin, can you imagine the chaos nationwide when every vote was challenged in every precinct? It would be a disaster for this country, regardless of who the winner was. Look at Florida in 2000, what a mess that was, and that was at least confined to one state because it was the only state that was close, and in that year it happened to determine the winner. Can you imagine the absolute chaos? I'd be very concerned to see what would actually happen. I hope it never gets to that, but that's a problem. I also want to point out another argument that people make. They say, well, you know, the smaller states, some people believe the smaller states are Republican, population-wise, are Republican-leaning, and the bigger states are Democratic-leaning. That's not the case. This past election, I checked, of the 10 largest states, 6 of the 10 largest states by population in this last election voted Republican. 4, California, New York, Illinois, and Michigan, voted Democrat. And Michigan was razor thin, as we know. Point being is it's not like the larger states necessarily vote for Democrats. Likewise, on the smaller state side, it was split 5-5. Maine was one of the states that leaned Democrat. I know they split their electors, but overall they voted Democrat. So it's split, whether it's a small grouping small states together or large states together in the current moment, it splits both parties. That is not an argument in favor of staying in the National Vote Compact. And finally, I also want to point out, the biggest argument for this, I think, is philosophical for people. It says, oh, well, we should choose, the popular vote should count. I'm not saying there aren't, but if you look at our similar countries, they don't elect their chief executive by popular vote either. Canada doesn't, the United Kingdom doesn't, Germany doesn't. Just take 3 examples. They elect prime ministers. And most of the time, the prime minister would be from the party that gets the most number of votes because they get a parliamentary majority, but that's not necessarily the case. You can have a parliamentary majority, for example, in the United Kingdom, without having a majority of the votes of the populace, depending on how the votes break down. So there's no real pressing argument as to why the popular vote should control. And last but not least, I just want to point out this was voted down. I know bodies change, people come and go. This was voted down twice before it was voted through by what is defined in the way we vote in this place, a very narrow margin. I'm sure he'll love to hear this and remind us, but our current Secretary of State Amore was opposed to this. He voted against it. It was a bipartisan opposition to it. It was pushed through by the then Speaker. For whatever reasons, he supported it, and we know when the Speaker wants something, they can, they get people to vote for it. But at the end of the day, this is not good for Rhode Island. So one of my bills withdraws this from the compact, and the other bill, if we insist on staying, and I'll let the witness discuss it, because I discussed it with him and I put it in consultation. The other bill at least modifies the way we choose our electors. So with that, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn it over to the witness.
I'm Sean Parnell. I'm with an organization called Save Our States. We are focused on defending the Electoral College and educating legislators and the public about the dangers of the National Popular Vote Compact. And I'm here to testify today in favor of both H 5519 and 5520. I'll go ahead and I guess start with 5519. That is the bill that would withdraw Rhode Island from the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. As Representative Newberry indicated, this bill has a long history. Here in Rhode Island, there were many bipartisan votes to oppose it and not let it through. And then, of course, in 2013, it did make it through, again, over bipartisan opposition. One of the things that I wanted to just bring to your attention today was a number of the problems with the compact that weren't really part of the discussion then. They hadn't really been discovered or well understood at that time. The biggest problem, though, and I think Representative Newberry touched on this, is your state's electoral votes are supposed to be your voice in the presidential election process. They are supposed to represent the people of Rhode Island, just as you represent the constituents of your district. Under the National Popular Vote Compact, of course, that is eliminated. That is severed. Rhode Island's 4 electors would no longer represent the people of Rhode Island. They would represent this sort of amorphous national electorate that the compact tries to cobble together. Beyond that, however, there are a number of technical problems, defects in the compact that, in the words of one of the law professors who helped to initially develop the concept of this compact, will lead to a historic debacle and electoral crisis in his terms. Just a couple of these problems include that if for some reason a non-member state has not yet made its vote totals public by the time the compact requires it, estimated vote totals can be used instead of real, authentic vote totals in order to calculate the national popular vote totals. Ranked choice voting causes a problem for national popular vote. And I'm not here to testify for or against RCV. You know, I've got friends on both sides of that. Ranked choice voting creates a problem because it anticipates that every state is going to produce a single vote total for each candidate, whereas under ranked choice voting there are at least 2, an initial and a final. These numbers can differ by tens or hundreds of thousands of votes, and it's not clear which vote total is supposed to be used or should be chosen when they're, again, aggregating votes across state lines. If the national vote margin were very close, you could not have a national recount because every state has its own recount laws, and many of them would simply not be able to apply a national margin to their in-state votes. That's just not the way that their state recount laws are written. So you would have a partial recount, some states counting, some states not counting, and I suspect that would cause a lot of anxiety and unhappiness, especially if that recount wound up changing the outcome of the election. Unusual election practices in other states that don't really matter right now as long as elections are confined to a single state can make a big difference. So California, because of kind of an unusual situation in 2016, essentially wound up giving Donald Trump an extra 4.5 million votes that would have been applied in the national vote count because he was the endorsed candidate in California, of course, of the Republican Party, but he was also the endorsed candidate of something called the American Independent Party. And because there was only a single line on the ballot for people to vote for Donald Trump, and there were separate slates of electors, the way the compact is written in terms of how votes are supposed to be counted, taken off of an official statement, because California essentially double reported Donald Trump's popular vote totals because these two separate slates tied for second place in California, it would have given him an extra 4.5 million votes in 2016, meaning that technically Donald Trump would have won under the National Popular Vote Compact in 2016, which seems like a pretty defective and broken system, if you ask me. Another issue is that the compact can be very easily manipulated by states. They can lower their voting age. They can allow parents to cast votes on behalf of their minor children in order to boost their state's share of the national vote total. Or a state could simply decide that they are going to report their votes as if every voter had cast as many votes as the state has electors. So Wyoming could, instead of reporting a 125,000 vote margin for the Republican in the last go-around, they could have reported a 375,000 vote margin because they have 3 electors. And there's nothing that you would be able to do about it if you're in the compact. You would have to accept these inflated or manipulated vote totals. So all told, the compact has some very serious defects. Some of them were known at the time that Rhode Island joined, maybe not well explained by me when I was here, though. But now new additional defects have come to the forefront, and I think that it's worth asking the question whether Rhode Island should be in a compact that is prone to, again, as one of the law professors who helped to develop this idea said, prone to electoral crisis and historic debacle. I'm going to go ahead and move now into H 5520, which I think is a really interesting bill. This actually addresses what many advocates of the National Popular Vote Compact have said that they are trying to address, which is the winner-take-all issue. Under winner-take-all, of course, states that use winner-take-all simply give all of their electors to whoever wins a majority or even a plurality of the votes. It's not broken up by percentage. There's no proportional allocation or anything like that. 48 states plus Washington, D.C. use winner-take-all. 2 use the congressional district method. What H 5520 would do is something that was actually done in the early years of the Republic by a couple of states, which would be to divide the state up into, right now, 4 elector districts. It's similar in some ways to what Maine and Nebraska do, where they have congressional districts. The winner of each congressional district receives 1 electoral vote, and then the statewide winner receives the other 2. What 5520 would do is divide the state into 4 elector districts. Each district would be composed of municipalities with roughly equal populations, and then the voters of each district would elect an elector. The benefit that this has over the congressional district method, at least in my mind, is that it would continue to give Rhode Island this sort of system, even if, as is unfortunately predicted, Rhode Island goes down to 1 U.S. House seat after the next U.S. Census. If you had a congressional district method, a congressional district method doesn't really work in a state with only a single House district. A elector district method, on the other hand, would mean you go from 4 districts to 3 districts. The main benefit of this is that, from what I've been able to glean and talking with some people here in Rhode Island, at least 1, possibly 2 of these elector districts would be competitive. This would draw the attention of presidential campaigns, both the Republican and the Democrat, and this would give Rhode Island the attention that critics of winner-take-all, I think with some justification, criticize winner-take-all for excluding states from the process because they do not get the attention if they are a safe state, as Rhode Island is. So one of the other benefits is it would ensure that the candidates that come would have to be very local in terms of their interests. They would have to pay attention not just to the big national issues, which they would still continue to pay attention to, but to the very local interests of the people of each district. And because Rhode Island is such a geographically small district, even if only one or two of the electorate districts are competitive, because people who live and vote in that competitive district, many of them are going to work in or otherwise be closely connected to maybe a non-competitive elector district, it's going to make sense for those presidential candidates to pay attention to issues across the entire state, not just those that might be seen as of interest to that one or two competitive district.